LEGO Batman is a surprising turn of events for the LEGO series. While it is a licensed game, it doesn't directly adapt any of the movies and instead serves as an amalgamation of various versions of the characters and scenarios. Visually, it takes after the Silver Age comics with the later 70s style, tonally it matches that era too, as well as the very goofy Adam West Batman show. Each of its chapters focuses on a villain pairing which probably not coincidentally roughly lines up with a movie. The Riddler and Two-Face pairing matches Batman Forever, Penguin and Catwoman aligns with Batman Returns, and the Joker is paired with Harley, but there are vague ties to Tim Burton's Batman from 1989. And lastly, characters like Harley Quinn and Man-Bat either started in or had some of their most iconic appearances in the animated series. LEGO Batman serves as a loving, silly, and charming homage to the various ways Batman has been depicted throughout the years. Released in 2008, LEGO Batman would see the same scattershot release as its other LEGO cousins on the PC, Xbox 360, PS3, PS2, Wii, and with pared down versions on the PSP and DS. While still built in the same framework that LEGO Star Wars had established, a button-mashy beat-em-up platformer with light puzzles, LEGO Batman actually does have a fair bit to shake up the formula. Free from the constraints of following movies, levels tend to be allowed to be all action, and this is in part thanks to the game's structure, featuring 6 episodes, 3 for the heroes and 3 for the villains. In every hero level, Batman and Robin are the sole playable characters, which allows these levels to be specifically catered to their skills and ability and makes them some of the strongest in the game. On their face, the two characters are identical, on top of the basic combat, slightly updated with smoother animations, more exciting feedback as enemies fly into walls and explode, and better targeting that makes the game feel buttery smooth. They can use batarangs to target and destroy objects or enemies in the environment, and they can grapple at specified points. However, each character has their own separate transformations, which adds a great layer of asynchronous co-op as the duo help each other gain access to these transformations and levels and use their separate abilities to push forward, which is another fantastic addition to the game. While not every one of these transformations is created equal, both characters get some relatively fun ones mixed in, with Batman getting the demolition suit, which lets him plant bombs to destroy silver objects and enemies, the glide suit to cross wide gaps, the sonic suit to shatter glass, and the heat protection suit that's rather self-explanatory, while Robin gets the technology suit which allows him to pilot remote-controlled vehicles, the magnet suit to climb certain walls, the attraction suit used to collect junk that can be deposited into special containers to get useful objects or collectibles, and the water suit which lets him sink to the bottom of water. Most of these suits could uncharitably be described as glorified keys, but I think most, outside of the very tedious attraction suit, are fun enough to use. Each level in the hero campaign also ends with bosses of varying quality, as the primary chapter villain's henchman swaps level to level, and the old one is left behind to deal with the Caped Crusader. All this notably means the villains lack bosses almost entirely. You can't exactly have them stop Batman. The hero side of the game matches the quality LEGO Indy had, if not outpaces it, if only because unlike Indy, the second player is given just as much to do. On the villain side, each level is also centered on 2 characters with unique powers, usually 1 or 2 from a list of gliding, bombs, high jump, super strength, which allows moving some large objects, immunity to toxic, mind control for controlling certain NPCs or opening certain doors, as well as being a girl to get through girl doors, walking on the bottom of water, and a small handful of unique powers. Namely Penguin's bombs, which waddle around before exploding, Joker's zapper, which can power generators, and Mr. Freeze's ice gun to freeze certain liquids into platforms, allowing for equally slick level design on the villain end, although featuring a revolving door technique, with the main villain of each chapter remaining constant throughout while their henchman rotates around. The results aren't always as clean as Batman and Robin, but tend to be fairly balanced and strong, with many of the side villains being even more interesting than the main villain that leads the story. The game also retains LEGO Indy's toned-down collectibles and extras, thankfully, featuring the same 10 mini-kits and 1 red brick per level, alongside a new one in hostages, which tend to be pretty easy to find as they're almost always next to a mini-kit or another, and finding these in each level gives the player access to the secret character Hush. As these games tend to be, LEGO Batman is a charming little game. As with Indy, targeting the then next-gen consoles allowed them a lot more freedom, as does not being restrained by having to follow a movie's script. Batman and Robin being the sole focus for half the game allowed them to dump a lot of their effort into making them animate incredibly smoothly, and even giving a few of the suits unique animations to themselves. And coupled with a few new touches, like enemies flying about as they're punched, the game becomes a chaotic flurry of moving parts that's really satisfying. This extends to the villains as well, with certain villains like Clayface who have really good animations as he smoothly transitions his arms into different hammers and other weapons to use against enemies. The game also has a lot of creative and unique environments to show off the usual diorama style because again, without a movie to be tied down by, they can go ahead and make a level in a circus, an ice cream factory, a bank, and so on. Despite the villain levels ostensibly taking place in the same areas, shortly before Batman and Robin arrive as the villains set up their plans, they often are wholly unique levels with the same theming, which not only fleshes these tiny little dioramas out, but also makes the game feel like a lot of care and love went into it, which I really appreciate. The game also uses Hans Zimmer's incredible score from Tim Burton's Batman, with the dark but triumphant title music, which makes the game feel incredibly grand from moment one, although admittedly, the actual music for most of the levels is rarely as exciting. The one area the game falters slightly in is the cutscenes, not so much for how they're animated, because they still have the charm, but this is the one spot where not being able to play off of movie scenes obviously hampers things, as most of this game's cutscenes are little more than the level's characters arriving somewhere and doing something slightly goofy before the game starts. Batman and Robin's half of the story is a bit harder to discuss, honestly, as I basically already covered what they do, and they do those same things throughout the game. Riddler's Revenge is an extremely simple storyline. Riddler and his group of supervillains, Clayface, Mr. Freeze, Poison Ivy, and Two-Face, are planning to rob a bank. It's perfectly Golden Age or Adam West as a setup, and despite seemingly being straightforward, it has a bit of variety going on. The chapter features the first obligatory vehicle mission in the game. These are a bit of a mixed bunch. The hero side of the Riddler story has a car mission, Penguins has boat missions, and Joker gets planes. The car missions are rather nice. They need much less wrangling since they control tighter and aren't forced into constant movement, although they're admittedly pretty simple. This one consists largely of shooting cars and dragging them around to be taken off by helicopters. The bosses of this chapter prove to be a mixed bag as well. Clayface and Poison Ivy are very generic button mashers, but Mr. Freeze, and especially the final fight, which involves fighting both Two-Face and Riddler by deflecting Two-Face's bullets, are actually quite good. I don't actually have a lot else to say on this episode, primarily because Batman and Robin are static elements of it. They're fun characters at a base level, and their suits provide mix-ups in each level, but even those suits are rather narrow in their usage, and the bosses can be extremely hit and miss, as I said. The story also isn't anything to write home about, and the cutscenes kind of fall flat for that. I like the charm of the simple Golden Age stories, but each of them roughly fit the same format. Go somewhere, fight henchmen, do this 4 times, and fight the big guy. Riddler and Two-Face robbing a bank is charming, creates some fun settings, but after beating them, they get put in a police car and go to jail, which is basically how every chapter ends. The villain perspective is a fun story twist though, as they tend to take place minutes before the hero side. The villains are trying to obtain something, and the main one gets away right as the heroes catch up, with the henchmen being left behind, usually because they get distracted. Clayface is captivated by gold, Freeze just likes the cold, and Ivy wants to make mutant plans. One thing that is lacking is boss fights in most levels, as you can't exactly have them defeat Batman and Robin. It'd be nice if there was some kind of boss fight or any kind of finale to these, but a lot of them kind of just taper out at the ends. The ice cream factory level for the villain side is one of the highest points in the game. Mr. Freeze's freeze gun is a cool combat gimmick, but enemies are so weak it hardly matters, although its ability to create platforms and the level having a bunch of scenarios to make it useful are what really carries it. Riddler has relatively less to do, but is still involved in the platforming. Most of the puzzles revolve around moving him around using freeze. Clayface in the first level has high jump and super strength, Ivy in the third has high jump and toxic immunity, plus can open woman doors and make certain plants grow, and Two-Face in the fourth and fifth levels has toxic immunity and a gun. It's a nice variety, and while the Riddler's mind control powers do come up quite a bit, in the first 3 levels especially, it's on the henchmen to help him get around because they have so many more abilities. It maintains a good balance while giving each player enough to do, and the constantly shifting characters give a lot of variety too. It is kind of weird that the villain half skips the vehicle mission for this chapter only, but I suppose they didn't quite know what to do with a Riddler car or a Two-Face truck, considering the Riddler is a mind control man and Two-Face has a gun. The villain missions do have a general lack of closure, as I said before. They all abruptly end right before the final battle and kind of just don't really conclude. This one specifically, they break into the bank and then it just cuts to black and the credits roll. A what-if ending may have been a better finale, although I don't know what WB's stance would be on something like that. Although it still feels like some kind of boss would be in order of some kind. Power-Crazed Penguin has some unique aspects on both sides. On the hero side, it begins with a Catwoman boss, even though she's also the final henchman in the ending tag fight. Catwoman, Killer Croc, Man-Bat, and Bane serve as the henchmen here, although oddly, Bane only appears in the villain campaign. And these characters provide a few interesting locations between them at least. The rooftops of the first level are very Batman, and the zoo is a bit of goofy fun for Man-Bat in the same way the ice cream factory was. The final fight especially comes together nice, with the gimmick centering on reflecting Penguin's exploding penguins at generators to reach him and Catwoman. Batman and Robin's vehicles are given enough to do, but the boats are very slippery and loose, which makes them a lot less pleasant to control than the cars. The story for this chapter is sort of nonsense. Penguin mails a bunch of penguins with guns to various people in Gotham and is making a satellite powered by a diamond to make them shoot people if Batman doesn't stop him. It's ridiculous, but it does kinda match the tone, and it's fun in a campy way. The villain side's got some neat oddities too. The beginning level is wholly unique without being paralleled in the hero missions, and features Bane, who presumably escapes from justice after this, although it also lacks Man-Bat. I wonder if something changed at some point and there wasn't enough time to change both stories. Bane and Killer Croc are functionally identical with super strength and toxic immunity, although Killer Croc can also sink to the bottom of water like Robin's scuba suit, so the Man-Bat switch in the hero story may have been a late addition, while Catwoman just has high jump and woman powers. Penguin is the real standout for this one, with both a glide and bombs, although his march forward after use, which give him some unique application over Batman's bombs, which is nice considering like a lot of the other parallel characters are basically pretty direct parallels. The variety is a little weaker, and unlike the first scenario, Penguin is doing a lot more of the heavy lifting for the secondary characters, although I will say the museum section exclusive to this story is quite good with its laser grids and dinosaur riding. In an unexpected twist, the villain's boat mission is a little more interesting than the hero one as well, as Killer Croc's boat is immune to toxic, and Penguin's submarine can dive below the waves to reach certain areas, which sees a little bit of use, although neither of these is that thoroughly explored. The Joker's return serves as a nice finale. I actually have no idea what the Joker's plan is supposed to be though, because I don't know, the story's just not very clear on this one. He kidnaps Commissioner Gordon and then eventually he hides in a clock tower to do something. That said, the Joker is, a pretty iconic villain, and there's a lot of variety here that also fits a bit of a theme, from a toxin factory to a carnival to a nightclub, and of course the clock tower, which is most likely a reference to the 1989 Batman movie. Harley Quinn, Mad Hatter, and Killer Moth serve as the henchmen here, and Harley's boss fight at the carnival is incomprehensible. Figuring out that you need to chase her for a solid 20 seconds or so before she becomes vulnerable is both very tedious and just weird enough that it'll feel like the fight isn't working when she constantly jumps away and resets herself every once in a while. Although Killer Moth makes up for it with a cute gimmick based around manipulating his position with lights. The plane section here controls more or less identically to LEGO Star Wars, although both this and the villain version feel really cluttered and disorganized honestly. The levels are just kind of these big flat messes covered in shit to shoot. On the other side of the coin, I should have used that one for the Two-Face stuff. The villain's got a few cool things too. The first level ends with a boss fight against Commissioner Gordon. It's not an interesting boss, but it's the best the villain's got. Joker is one of the weaker links in his campaign. He has guns and can activate buttons, which are basically glorified switches, but his lineup of sidekicks is pretty nice. Harley is a high jumper with a gun, but she's used to good effect, especially in the extremely vertical clock tower level, which, now that I think about it, is also a bit of a highlight for Batman and Robin's side. Killer Moth glides and has a gun. Mad Hatter is a Riddler clone, and Scarecrow is maybe the least interesting character in any level of the game. He's toxic immune and has mind control, but never really gets a chance to use it. The relatively simple gang doesn't have as much variety of interesting use as the Riddler's group, but is utilized well enough and keeps both players on roughly equal footing while giving them unique things to do, especially in a few of the standout levels of this, like the aforementioned Clock Tower, as well as the Carnival level, which has some neat back and forth moments. As these games do, there's also a fair amount of bonus content. I already talked about the collectibles, including the hostages, which are new, although those are basically pointless because of how close they are to mini-kits. The bonus levels are both LEGO City variants. It's pretty rough. The Wayne Manor one is especially bad. There are exactly 1 million studs in the form of exactly 100 purple studs, most of which are split between two minigame sub-areas. A very tedious 2D platforming section, and an awkward ball-pushing minigame that, while not as broken as I thought it was at first once I got used to it, still feels rather janky as the balls tend to just kind of rocket themselves around a lot quicker than you'd expect. On the other hand, Arkham Asylum, which barely looks like Arkham for some reason, is basically the other extreme. There's an abundance of easily available studs, which probably makes it the least tedious of the LEGO City clones so far. Thankfully, although the camera angle is not very good, LEGO Batman is a step better than even Indy. Well, it's fairly quick to talk about it. The level designs tend to be very strong for this series. The interesting hero and villain format gives a lot of variety, especially as both have different strengths to their formats. The freedom from having to follow the plots of movies that the prior games were stuck with frees every level up to be an action-packed set-piece fest, although admittedly the cutscenes take a pretty hard hit for it. The goofy slapstick of the game still shines through though, especially when painted with the lighter, goofier colors of the Batman of the distant past, which give this game a lot of personality of its own. The game ends the first style of LEGO games on top. After this, and I guess the very non-traditional LEGO Rock Band, the games would undergo a pretty large format shift that turned things on their head, and the games that follow this are more in line with the more recent games like Skywalker Saga, where they're very focused on their hub worlds. LEGO Batman is even better than the peaks this series already had, and while still very easy and clearly aiming young, oozes charm and is a fantastic casual game, especially if you have someone younger to play with or have a lot of nostalgia for it.